You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 26th of October. Muslim youth rapes 6-year-old and gets just 5 years. Hospitals £1 billion in parking charges in only 10 years. Illegal immigrant found hiding in a Chinese takeaway cupboard. A real Chinese takeaway. Report from Nick Griffin, MEP from the belly of the beast. Video on Islam's growth sparks debate at Synod. Germany and France demand reintroduction of Balkan visas. On the road to death panels. Thought for the day, are we becoming a bit soft? And finally, be careful where you put your mobile. UK News. Leif Patel, 22, of Sackville Gardens, Ilford, was sentenced at Snaresbrook Crown Court after a jury found him guilty of 4 counts of raping a child under 13 and 3 counts of sexually assaulting a child under 13 during the years of 2005 to 2006. The child was so traumatised that she did not tell her mother until this year. Brian St Louis, defending Patel, said he was sexually immature at the time of the attacks because of his age, which was 15. He said there is no evidence that he has committed any sexual crimes at all apart from these matters in his teenage years. He said Patel has a fiancée of 5 years who he is looking forward to marrying after serving his sentence. He was handed an extended licence period of 2.5 years. Wordsdale spokesman commented, "This sick bastard raped a 6-year-old girl and is now looking forward to being married. He should be castrated." Hospital car parks have raked in more than £1 billion from patients, relatives and staff in the last 10 years, figures revealed yesterday. Drivers are now stumping up £160 million a year in charges, more than double the amount of a decade ago. 1 in 4 hospital trusts raise at least £1 million a year in fees. Some are pocketing nearly £4 million. Critics describe the charges as tax on the sick and have called for them to be abolished. England is the only country in the UK where hospitals still charge for parking. Scotland and Wales outlawed the practice in 2009. UK border agency arrests 3 for immigration offences following the raid of Chef Beijing takeaway on Ramyard Road in Bedford. The head chef, a 30-year-old Chinese national, was found in the takeaway's cupboard. He had failed to leave the country when denied asylum. The assistant chef, a 21-year-old Malay, was arrested for his overstaying his visa. The third, a 39-year-old Chinese, also denied asylum, was discovered when border agency officers visited the home of the other 2. Bedford on Sunday reports Chef Beijing faces a potential fine of up to £30,000, £10,000 for each of the 3 illegal workers, unless it can prove that the correct pre-employment checks were carried out, such as seeing a passport or Home Office document. The World Date writer comments, "It would be interesting to discover the fine that the owners of Chef Beijing actually receive and whether or not they actually reopen later this week. I wonder where they will find the new chefs. Talk about who flung dung." Now I hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP, for his report today, which deals with the failure of the EU to take over Europe's finances and the rise of nationalism in Spain.
The joint German-Europhile plan to seize financial control of the whole of Europe has now been laid bare. I was going to tell you about this last week, but the storm over my Twitter account caused a last-minute change of subject. So the most important news from the EU this week remains last week's news that Germany's finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, gave to journalists while on a flight home from Asia. By the way, I'm recording this en route for Ukraine, where I'm on an election monitoring team this weekend, so my apologies for any background travel noises. So, to return to Herr Schäuble, the economic hawk spelled out the price that the German elite intends to extract for bailing out Greece and Spain from the disaster forced on them by membership of the euro. He also told journalists that his words have the full support of German Chancellor Frau Merkel. That's the rotten, undemocratic core of what Herr Schäuble described as, quote, a large step towards fiscal union, unquote, would be the creation of a hugely powerful EU currency commissioner with the right to strike down national budgets and send his own economic police on dawn raids of national government offices. This would, at a single stroke, strip the elected and accountable governments of every nation in the Eurozone, perhaps even in the entire EU, of every last shred of economic sovereignty. This monstrosity, of course, is precisely the solution which the Europhiles had in mind when they created the single currency system, knowing right from the start that it would inevitably lead to a crisis that would demand a radical answer, which is not, I'm pleased to be able to say, to mean that they will get their way. It is by no means clear that Germany's constitutional court would accept the move. Even if it did, it's hard to see how any remotely democratic government anywhere in Europe could persuade their own people to accept it. And, while they've already created a European police force and a European army, neither is remotely big enough to impose an EU dictatorship on Greece, let alone on Europe, from Galway to the Russian border. It would be like Germany invading Poland in 1939 with 200 Hitler Youths on bicycles. Not, of course, that it's fair to lump ordinary Germans in with Frau Merkel and Commissar Barroso and their Blofeld-style plot to put all Europe's eggs into one basket case. They'd have to sell an awful lot of Audis and pay an awful lot more taxes to pay for that lot, let alone deal with the debt mountains of southern Europe that Herr Schäuble wants them to shoulder as the price of making Brussels the economic overlord of Europe. That's why Swiss credit agency ICV stripped Germany of its AAA credit rating last month, explaining that when you create these backstops, the money has to come from somewhere and it can all go wrong, unquote. Very wrong indeed. The Europhiles decided they wanted a crisis, believing it would give them an excuse for total European financial union. They should have taken heed of the wise old warning to be careful what you wish for, because now they've got their crisis, and it's so devastating that it's on course to unite the whole of Europe against their entire crazy project. There is, however, a simple answer, an easy way out. Germany and Holland should leave the Eurozone. The euro would plummet, making southern European goods, holidays, and second homes so absurdly cheap for the Germans, Dutch, Brits, and Swedes that their economies would bounce back. Everyone would be a winner, except me, because my salary is paid in euros. So while you were struggling to decide whether to buy a villa in Spain or an apartment in Paphos, I'd need a wheelbarrow full of junk notes to buy a loaf of bread. All of which means that there is even more urgency in the long drive to build a nationalist bloc to oppose the Europhiles' totalitarian madness and give our peoples a real, positive alternative. So I'm pleased to be able to tell you that last week in Brussels, I hosted Josep Anglada, leader of Spain's Plataforma por Catalunya, and the party's head of international relations, Enrique Ravello. Up until recently, the Spanish nationalist movement has been splintered into nearly 20 warring fragments, with electoral support at a level that would humiliate the monster raving loony party. But Plataforma is breaking the mould. Founded in 2002, they've steadily increased their number of council seats from 3 to 17, and then, last year, to 69. Although based in Catalonia, and in favour of the region having more control over its own affairs, they believe in preserving the unity of Spain. Their key message is that Spain, where immigrants, more and more of them Muslims, already make up 16% of the population, should stop all further third world immigration. They also point to the baleful impact of globalization on Spanish manufacturing industry and on the well-being of Spanish workers. As a result, the polls predict that they will take more than 3% of the vote and win 3 seats in the hastily called regional parliament elections on November 25th. That will provide the perfect springboard for them to follow through their plan to launch nationally as the Spanish Platform for Freedom and go on to win a seat in Europe in 2014. That would be a massive step forward for nationalism in a country where 8% is considered a good result in local elections in party strongholds. But while our comrades in Spain are giving voters the opportunity to give their out-of-touch elite a real fright, and while we in the British National Party continue to rebuild our organisation after the battering we took in the 2 years from July 2009, our friends in the Vlaams Belang have just taken a battering of epic proportions in the Flemish council elections. In many areas, their votes slumped from over 25% to below 10%. In some councils, even with PR, they were completely wiped out. The battering was not unexpected. The problem is the NVA, a Thatcherite safety valve party promoted by the leftist media so shamelessly that it would make the BBC and Nigel Farage blush. Coming from nowhere, unless you count their leader's success on a popular TV quiz show, the NVA hoovered up votes from the Christian Democrats and Socialists, as well as from the Vlaams Belang, which still remains the third largest party in many areas. Longer term, of course, there is a silver lining. Taking the NVA, VB and Christian Democrat vote together, the combined vote for parties at least theoretically opposed to immigration was gigantic. The Flemish have woken up to the problem. They just need the inevitable failure of the NVA to deliver on their promises, to learn that true nationalism is the only answer. So the Vlaams Belang just has to grit its teeth and get through the bad times, as we did in our dark days in 2010 and 11. We got through it, and so will they. But if you'd like to do your tiny bit to help them, here's how. Philip de Winter's excellent book, Inshallah, The Islamification of Europe, is on sale through Excalibur for just a tenner. It's money well spent because it's the best book in its field, and it'll give Philip a smile to hear of another spike in sales. He's a brave man with a brave and lovely family, and right now they need a bit of nationalist solidarity. On the question of nationalism and families, we're getting a great response to the Young BNP Profam grooming awareness leaflet. This is such an important issue, and despite all the recent media fuss about predatory paedophiles, both the creatures within the BBC and in the Muslim gangs for which the BBC provided cover, precious little is being done, even now, to warn potential targets of the dangers. That's why we're doing it, and why it's something we'll continue to push forward over the weeks and months ahead. Sooner or later, the media will start squealing about our involvement and magnify our message many times over. While Profam is close to us, it's not party political and has no desire to be seen as a BNP front group. So it wrote to every single British MEP last week, asking them to get involved. To be fair to them, a handful of UKIPers did at least write to wish Profam well, but no one, I repeat, no one else could even be bothered to reply. And no one, I repeat, no one, except for me, has been willing to help. Any MEP who tries to excuse his complete inaction in the face of Muslim grooming by claiming he wasn't asked to help is a barefaced liar. Shame on them all. Lib, Lab, Con, UKIP or Independent, not one of them is fit to wipe the shoes of brave lady campaigners on this issue like Margaret Walker and Karen Downs. We will warn and protect those girls. We will secure recognition and justice for the victims. But we will have to do it through our own efforts.
Thank you, Nick. As usual, very diverse and very informative. World news. As controversy arose at the sign of a bishops on October 13th, when the participating bishops were shown a video that Vatican Radio described as a fear-mongering presentation of statistics attempting to show how Islam is conquering Europe and the rest of the world. The video, which was apparently screened by Cardinal Peter Cogwo-Turkson, the president of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, emphasised the high birth rates amongst Muslims in Europe in contrast with the falling fertility of native Europeans, and concluded that the continent would soon be predominantly Islamic. A World Date reporter stated, "True, but anything can happen to birth rates, can't it?" Germany, France and 4 other EU countries want to reintroduce visa requirements for people from the Western Balkans, saying that the measure is needed to combat a spike in asylum claims from that region. Ahead of this meeting of EU Home Affairs ministers, Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Luxembourg and the Netherlands sent a letter to the European Commission asserting that the thousands of people from the former Yugoslavia were delaying the system by claiming asylum with fake passports. Michelle Cocconi, spokesperson for EU Home Affairs Commissioner Cecilia Malmström, said that the worrying situation was creating serious problems for the functioning of the asylum system. He added that while only a small minority are abusing the system, this was crippling it. In 1950 there were 16 working Americans for every retiree. Today there are fewer than 3. By 2030 it's projected there will be fewer than 2. It doesn't take a supercomputer to realise that if they don't reduce the retirement and healthcare resources available to our elderly, the burden on each working American to provide those resources increases substantially. Yet the discussion about this crisis is 100% focused on how to cut the spending and zero attention is spent on the restoration of values that could rebuild families, produce more children and stop destroying the unborn. According to demographers, a fertility rate of 2.1, in which each adult woman produces 2.1 children on average over her lifetime, is necessary to keep the overall population steady, which means the overall US population is shrinking. Swiss International Airlines is raising hackles amongst Muslims over a slogan used in a recent German language publicity campaign. Alluding to its logo, taken from Switzerland's national flag, the slogan says in German, Kreuz ist Trumpf, literally, the cross is trumps or the cross is a plus. Muslims in Switzerland have responded negatively to the advertising, which they believe promotes Christianity over other religions. The issue has been picked up by newspapers in several Muslim countries. Switzerland maintains that its ad campaign does not carry any religious or political message. The slogan is, in fact, a play on words, referring to trumps in Jas, the popular card game that is strongly rooted in Switzerland, airline spokeswoman Miriam Seisak told Sonntag. A World Day spokesman commented, "These Muslims just want to feel offended. Their constant whining and complaining should be ignored." Thought for the day. We really are too bloody nice, aren't we? As per my title, are we British too soft on bastards? I remember in 2000 we looked on in horror and disbelief as the thugs acting for President Mugabe destroyed white farms and property, attacking farm employees, torturing and murdering the farmers and killing all the animals, both farm and domestic. This effectively reduced the manner of feeding that country's people almost by 100%. Which of course keeps the population from thinking and acting. Rather like the Russian scorched earth policy. We in the UK were the forefront of bringing sanctions against the elite of that country. The few farmers left won a landmark case against the government of Zimbabwe in April 2009. But now, wonder of wonders, and despite that government refusing to pay these farmers their dues, the UK government will soon ease sanctions against Mugabe's henchmen, allowing them to visit London and UK aid money to flow directly into Mugabe's government coffers, or rather to Mugabe himself. Of course our William Hague and Baroness Ashton should keep them out and freeze the proceeds of what is in effect theft, but will they? Hell no. They will be welcomed with open arms simply because the sodding Chinese have their greedy slitty eyes on Africa in total. Mark 1 against us. Mark 2 is the almost hysterical outcry against the BBC, who incidentally I have no time for at all, over this so vile case. Jimmy was a dirty old man who liked his girls, or boys, very young and preferably in a hospital bed. Now the victims who were ill is verging on the really sick mind, but for the most part most of these youngsters went along to see their hero, and in a matter of fact this is what they did. I'm not denigrating their experience, but in the light of the space-time continuum and the fact that they are already getting lawyered up, I would not be too cynical to suppose that large amounts of money could be at stake, depending on the range of their traumas. Whilst in court, a 22-year-old Muslim, Lynne Patel, who had raped a little girl of 6 on numerous occasions over the course of a year, was given 5 years and he was handed an extended licence period of 2.5 years. Now he is classed as a dangerous offender and is due to marry his fiancée when out of prison. British justice at its best. So who do we punish? Well, we punish white rapists and paedophiles, white men who look at dirty photos online, white men who go amok and kill either their own families or other people's, arsonists, white householders defending their property, and white people who have strong anti-establishment views, white people who do not share the multicultural dream, and many more of our people. Whilst of course the varied amount of ethnics in our society can often get away with just about everything, especially if the police can find a racial overtone, which of course there always is in groups of different colours and cultures. Now for one of the comments on site for Wednesday's World Date, it's a very interesting one. It's centred around the elderly immigrants and who will pay for them. Well, we all know the answer to that, in cash-strapped Britain, don't we? We will be paying for them, which is a bit odd, as the main pontification for massive immigration is that we need their money and we need immigrants to look after all the elderly white people there will be if we all survive the death lists in 2050, when in fact it will be the other way round. Not only will the old immigrants increase naturally, but we are letting hordes of already old people into the UK unchecked under the guise of family, especially in the case of Muslims and the Nepalese. They move in tribes and entire villages which include their already very elderly relatives. Now my question for the government is, Will these elderly apply for and get the same state pension as me? Now, I have worked most of my life and paid my dues, but because I took 10 years out to raise a family, my pension is not the full amount. What sort of rules, if any, will apply to an elderly Pakistani or Nepalese who has lived here for 1 year, if that? Will they get the full amount from the state, or rather you? Yep, I bet they do. Mark 3 against us. This is why they come to Britain. We are the only country in the EU, and indeed the world, who pays people who have not paid anything into this country at all ever. Are we stupid or what? I bet they'll get a full state pension, benefits because they cannot walk or crawl, and need copious family carers, yet another wad of money into their households, to say nothing of the vast amount of inbraids that need our state and NHS care. So all in all, the truth is, unless you are an immigrant or an international criminal, the British will not be fair to you. It is the case of the cobbler's children going the worst shod, and it must stop. Our judges need to be brought up to date, as does our discriminatory practices against our own tribe. Other tribes look after each other. Why on earth don't we? And finally, weird insurance claims. Whilst in a previous existence the weird and wonderful insurance claims centred around one's car. Do you remember the one "I didn't hit the tree, it came out and hit me" one? Well, here are some goodies about, of all things, mobile phones. Not only is the cloning and reselling of phones big business, but apparently insurance claims are as well. Here are a few stories that have affected the nation's technology. One farmer claims to have damaged his iPhone while calving, accidentally inserting it into the rear of a cow while attempting to use it as a torch. A woman in her early 40s from Nottingham admitted she had absent-mindedly baked her Nokia 6303i into a Victoria sponge intended for her daughter's birthday. It did not endure the heat of gas Mark V, she reported. Another woman is said to have lost her Samsung Galaxy after it was snatched from her hand by a rogue seagull while out walking on Barry Island beach in Wales. In another very unique claim, a couple lost their handset while reenacting a scene from Titanic, dropping it over the side of a cruise ship as they attempted to take a photo of themselves. Don't they know that is what ship's personnel are for? So be very careful what you do with your phone, or you could end up on World at 8. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynne Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend. And don't forget, the clocks go back. Yes, they go back. Good night.